All right, so I'm having an interview today with MaryAnne, and I'll get her to introduce herself.
Okay, my name is MaryAnne Seymour. I'm quite old. I've had a lot of interesting things happen in my life. I'm born in Queensland, but my dad's mob are from the Flinders Ranges up in South Australia. Never actually been home to country, called Queensland home. I'm a turtle person. My mob's country was turtle country, and I was actually born in turtle country up in Queensland. So I'm very strong as a turtle person. I've raised 6 kids. I had 4 kids, I raised 6. When I was growing up, my dad got a job on the Aboriginal Welfare Board, which caused quite a bit of interesting things in our family because my mum was English. Actually, she didn't know Dad was Aboriginal until a few years after she married him. Being a pom, she was very naive. And and Mum followed him onto the Aboriginal station, and she was a matron. Dad was a manager. I can remember him and Uncle Les Ridgway sitting in our kitchen laughing their heads off that all this mob had employed a couple of black fellas to work on the stations. And they were the managers, and they didn't know that they were Aboriginal, and it was really a big joke to them because they were in a position to be able to do stuff. Actually, I'll tell you a story. There was the, big bosses. It was one from the Aboriginal Welfare Board, Parton Health or something. Anyway, up at Tabulum on the station, and they had where they put the pans from the toilets, and there was a big trench. And it was between all the houses on the station and the manager's houses and the treatment room and all that. And Dad had been writing letter after letter for months saying this is unsanitary, this is disgusting, we need to get something done, people are getting sick, we've got to do something. Anyway, nothing happened. Anyway, these 2 blokes came in for one of their flying government visits. They'll drive in and look around and then drive out, and that's it. And Dad said, let's have a cup of tea. He said, it's a beautiful day, let's go for a walk instead of driving around the station. And he walked this bloke up to here, right in the trench, covered him. And Dad turned to him and he said, by the way, did you get my letters about this? And it was fixed a week later. Yeah, and years later out at my bridge, the same bloke turned up. Dad was out there and he looked at Dad as he got out of the car and he said, do you want anything done? He said, we're not going for any walks, are we? So that was the way Dad had of getting stuff fixed. You try to do it one way, and if it doesn't work that way, you do it another way, you do it our way. And he made an impact and he made a difference. And very proud of my dad. He's still alive. He's 82 now. He's now down in Victoria. He's getting closer to home, South Australia, and he's a recognised elder down there. He's just finished his Cert 4 in Aboriginal art history or something. I don't know what it is, some cultural art thing he's done. He's done Cert 3, Cert 4. He wants to get to university one day, and he's part of an art shed. He's won art prizes. He does mentoring at the art shed. Young people wander him and Auntie Gloria down there just sit there and paint, and they laugh and have a joke, and people wander in and they learn, and it's good. People at the jail or whatever wants to get people, our mob to come in after they leave, so it's part of their rehabilitation so they can sit with old people, and Dad's loving that.
And you've done a lot of work working in communities and teaching and stuff as well. Do you want to give a couple of examples of where situations have arisen in working with and for Aboriginal people, maybe some of the lessons you've learnt?
Definitely. I'll tell you what, the first lesson I learnt was when I was at school, and that was out at Lake Jolligo. And when I went to school at Lake, on the week talking to my sister, my older sister was Ducks at the high school in 1969. Now, if that school had known we were Aboriginal, she wouldn't have been Ducks. She wouldn't have gone on to be Triple Certificate Nursing sister, she wouldn't have gone on to be a doctor and a specialist. I wouldn't have got where I was because I got through. I got straight A's except for French. And that blew me duck's chances. But anyway, I didn't care. I got an education, but it really ground on me that I got an education at the expense of my culture. And I determined after that my kids would get an education and they could stand tall and proud. And everywhere I've went, and I've worked in adult education because our adults need to lead our kids. But we need to recognise that our adults are not stupid. They just didn't get the opportunity to learn when they were younger, and they're getting that education now because I've always thought a lot of it comes down to a shame factor. And you've got kids at school, and if you can't help them with their homework, what are you going to say? You're going to go, I can't do that. I don't know that. I'm stupid. I didn't get through school. Or you're going to go, no, I didn't need that. You don't need that. That's ridiculous. Don't worry about that. But if you teach adults and the adults know they can help their kids and the kids can be strong as well.
So tell me about some of the places that you've worked.
I've taught at adults at Warrabinda up in Queensland. I was there for a couple of years. I had the great honour to work with Uncle Wally Saunders. I don't know if you know Uncle Wally, but he was a student in my class. He came into my class first day of class ever, and the principal said, well, I don't know what you're going to teach him, but, just go in and see, maybe someone will turn up. Anyway, Uncle Wally was one of the students, and I got everyone to write down, what do you want to get out of class? Why are you here? And he actually got me to help him because he couldn't do it. And he said, I want to be able to take notes so I can speak up because I'm a traditional owner up on Palm. And I can't speak up because I can't take notes like everyone else. That was his goal. And that man, in the space of a couple of years at school, went from not being able to take notes to practicing on the whiteboard to in lunchtimes and no one see him, and speaking up. He got a poem published in the Courier Mail. He got a formal apology from KFC for his bad treatment in a shop one night because they said, no, you just take what you're given, because they thought he was just a useless old drunk. And he actually got empowered enough to write a letter and say, this isn't good enough, and I was embarrassed. And he got a beautiful apology. That man has now received state awards up in Queensland for his Footprints program. He did a family and domestic violence program. He's an inspirational speaker that is in great demand, and he has just made such a difference, and that's the power of education, and that's given someone the tools to do it for themselves and the confidence in themselves to do it. And I think teachers shouldn't be teachers, they should be a catalyst to get people to do it for themselves, because people are adults and they can take their own stance and they know where they want to go. So, yeah.
Okay. We're developing this program for students at university. Some might be Aboriginal, but the majority are non-Aboriginal. What are some of the lessons that do you think that you can give them that they might need to know if they're going to be working with or for Aboriginal people?
Inclusiveness, accepting people as people and not as someone with a different coloured skin or a different background, or making people feel welcome. Can I relate it to my diploma class?
Yeah, please.
I have a majority of Aboriginal students, and every year we get maybe 1, 2 non-Aboriginal students. Those students are suddenly the minority for the first time in their lives. And without exception, they will say at the end of the time, I have never felt so included. I've never felt so welcome. I was really nervous about going into a class full of Aboriginal people, but you took me in and you made me feel welcome. And we can now understand how Aboriginal people feel when they're the minority in a class of white people. So, yeah, and it makes a difference, and we're teaching them to accept people. Everybody's there to learn, and not everyone comes from the same background. Not everyone has had the same past experiences. It's very difficult if you go into a classroom and be treated as like a kid in a school, like the same attitudes of like the teachers, the boss, and you will do this and you will do that. And if it's not inclusive, because the way we work, people share. People don't just go away and work by themselves and I don't look at this work because I've got this work and I'm very precious of it. Hey, I found this out. Let's do this, or can we look at it this way? Let's talk about it. It's a much better way of doing things. And just including people.
Are there any other examples that you've got in your life experiences? Probably many, but anything that might help students in other backgrounds like law or health or social work, or just anything, maybe 2 or 3 other examples that will help teach people other ways of doing things or better communication skills? Or
I think it boils down to communication skills. It also boils down to understanding and not stereotyping and not assuming. And it's about actually seeing the person in front of you and not being afraid of also of offending someone, because you can cause more offence to someone by trying not to offend them. That's really offensive. If you know where I'm coming from.
Yep.
Because people, I assume you're this, so I'm going to treat you this way, and I hope you don't mind me saying this, but, things like this. And, ask questions.
Okay. I know that you've had questions or things thrown at you because you're fair. So do you want to just talk about
Is this G-rated?
Yeah. Do you want to just tell me about one, just how you feel in relation to your identity and what people have said to you that may have offended you because of them questioning your Aboriginality?
It's very hard. It gets easier when you get older, but I tell you what, it still hurts.
You want to build that into your answer, because they're going. Just say, what it is. What is it that people? How do they hurt you?
People hurt me by assuming I'm white, and the racist comments, attitudes, everything that come out when people don't know you're Aboriginal is even more offensive, because if someone makes an offensive comment, they're offending me as well as my mob. And you always seem like you're on the defensive, and it's very hard to get over that. And you get it from both sides, not just white, you get it from Aboriginal side as well. And people doubt, and you go, well, what does Aboriginal look like anyway? What does Aboriginal look like? I mean, people go, it always amuses me when you hear on the radio someone of Aboriginal appearance. What's Aboriginal appearance? We come in all different shapes and sizes. We're like this huge rainbow. And even in my own family, we're this huge rainbow, the whole spectrum. We've got the lot right from, like blue, black, purple, right down to pink. And I'm not the palest. I'm definitely not the darkest. But people will say things in front of you, and then if you say, I'm Aboriginal, and they go, you don't have to be, or you don't look it. I've even had someone say, did you have a blood transfusion? Yeah. And you think, well, no. In the jails, I never had any problem. I worked as a cultural liaison for a couple of years up in a protection prison. I never had any issues with the Murray fellas, the Aboriginal inmates. It was officers, and then I did a lot of cultural awareness training with officers, And it took a long time to break down those barriers and those perceptions. And I even had an officer one day, we were out in the walkway, and I was talking to one of the psychologists, and I overheard two officers saying something about, they bring the drug squad down, bring the black dog in. And he said, you go down to 80s, we've got a lot of black dogs in there. And I put a formal complaint into the general manager. I took it right up the top because that was an attitude that should be stepped on. And you can't get respect off people. You can't get people to respect you if you're going to talk to them like that. So just got to watch your mouth.
And you were giving me the example of somebody who said...
Oh, yeah, so I wasn't... Yeah, because I sort of got sick of having to explain myself all the time. Anyway, I walked in because I used to have the run of the prison because I'd go down and see any of the offenders, any tick of the clock. And I went in one day and there was a new officer, and there was two officers sitting at the little desk, and the new one's bailed me up. I said, well, who are you? What are you doing? I said, I'm the black one. I just come in to see this fella. And he said, you don't look black to me. I went, you haven't seen all of me. So totally embarrassed him, put him on the spot, and the other one said, I knew she'd get you. Because I think I got him early in the piece too or something else. So, but that learning to stand up for yourself and speak up for yourself. And a lot of them, they won't speak up for themselves. And I think it's up to us trouty mouth ones to actually do that and stand up and have a say and say something. But most people will just walk away. Because I spent probably the first half of my life walking away. And then I decided, no, I'm not going to do that. I've got to stand up because I've got kids. I've got to stand up for my kids. I've got to stand up for my family. I've got to stand up for my friends and all the rest of my mob. And someone's got to do it. And through my teaching, because that first time you've got to stand up and talk to a group of students, it's like, here we go. And it's not as bad as you thought it was. And encouraging people to get up and talk as well. I had a really quiet class at Rabinda for about a week. And after that, couldn't shut them up. We did different things, different ways of learning, because people learn more seeing, doing, making it interesting, hands-on. I did cooking lessons on a Thursday because that was kid money day, pension day, shopping day, card day. And the principal said, you won't have any class on Thursday. And I thought, well, so I told them on the Monday, everybody, I asked them, we're going to make, I showed a picture, I said, this lemon meringue pie. I said, we're going to make that Thursday if you want to come in. Yeah, we made two beautiful big lemon meringue pies. And then the next week we cooked something else and something else. And I would have up to 40 students all week, including Thursday. I had students come over, they were doing childcare. I was just tutoring because I didn't teach the childcare, but I got them into it and got them into the preschool so they could do their childcare. And Friday when we knocked off at lunchtime, there were two ladies that come over to my place for the afternoon so they could have some tutoring and get their work done. And from what I've heard, one of them's actually gone on to do a diploma now. So, yeah, and it's all about empowerment. Yeah. Uncle Wally, who I consider myself totally blessed being able to work with that man. He was sitting down outside the canteen one day, so I sat down next to him on the ground because he's sitting there, and he said, he said, if you put all the people that had education on Warrabinda on this side of the room, there'd be heaps there. I haven't had an education, sorry, and all the ones that have over here, there's nobody. I said, yeah. I said, but Uncle, I said, if you get all the people who are smart and put them on this side of the room, you won't be able to move. You put all the silly ones over here. I said, you won't get many at all. I said, you know what the difference is? Opportunity. And someone believing in you and you believing in yourself. And it's just getting that, because how many generations didn't get that education, and yet we expect our kids to go to school and excel? Who's supporting them? They can't get it at home because their parents haven't got those tools to give them. That's why adult education is so important. You've got to break the cycle. So that's where I'm at.
So if you had a message, something that you would like to say to non-Indigenous people who might be coming out to work.
Ones that are being educators.
Well, you can give a message first to those who might be coming out as educators, and then just generally.
Yeah.
Then, you know.
Yeah, people coming out of university. Forget what you've ever learned. People are people. Never give up on anybody. And you've got to remember, to educate someone, you've got to believe in that person, because if you don't believe in that person, they're not going to believe in themselves. And they'll get nowhere. So that's probably the crux of it in my book. I believe in my students, and they know I believe in them, and they just go, and they do it for themselves. I don't do it for them. They've got it inside. It's just a case of letting them know that they can open up and let it out. And if they let it out, there's no stopping them.
And people who might be arriving for the first time in a community where there are Aboriginal people, what is it that they need to know?
They need to know that they have to be accepted and trusted, and it takes time. You can't just walk into a community and go knocking on doors and stuff like that. That's the welfare, and that's the ones that's going to take your kids, and that's the ones that's going to tell you how to run your lives, and that's the ones that's going to chuck you out of your house, and that's the ones that's going to arrest you or take your kids away. That's what they did. And there's a lot of memories that are very strong. So you have to recognise all that, and it's rude just to bowl up to someone's house and knock on the door, especially if you're like a government person. Not going to happen. People are going to run a mile, and I don't blame them. I do too. Yeah. So
it's about taking time and
it's taking time. It's about respect, and it's also about being fair income and being there for the long haul. A lot of people will go in with an agenda and say, "Oh, I know I've got to get this done, so I'm going to go and do this." One word I hate is consultation. I hate consultation. Consultation is where people go in, outsiders go in into a community and tell Aboriginal people what they need. And get a few people say, "Oh, we've told them, we've consulted." And then they do it. And I think, yes, some people might need some things, but you need people to say, "Yes, I want your help. I need you to help me. This is my problem." You don't go in and say, "We're going to solve this problem for you," because that's wrong, and that's invading people's privacy and everything, and it's also treating people like they can't manage their own affairs. And people, again, people in communities are adults, and people are very clever in communities. I'm out at Warrabinda talking to people, and I say, "Well, okay, you think you're stupid, you think you don't know nothing. How have you survived all this time under these conditions with nothing? How have you done it? You survive every day. That takes a lot of skill. That takes a lot of knowledge. That takes a lot of stuff that all these government people out coming out here telling you what to do don't have. You've done it. They'd never be able to do what you do." So, yeah, I got my first maths lesson at Warrabinda. I walked in and I was okay. How many of you are getting ripped off at the shop? And they're, okay, so let's work it out. Let's play with some money. And let's work out how much things cost and how much change you've got to get and everything. Because I reckon if you go into the shop and you take your $50 in and you come out with nothing, chances are you got ripped off. Let's work on it. Wasn't very popular at the shop because I think they were ripping people off. But that's empowerment, and it's people learning stuff. I mean, you can't expect people to know if they haven't learned. And also I had 2 signs up in my classroom. Is it wrong and fail? I said, these are 2 words that we were never going to use because wrong is just something you haven't learnt yet. You're having a go at it, and it's a learning experience. And fail, how the heck can you fail if you gave it a go? So we don't use them. And that's my own personal philosophy, and I will be learning on that. So I don't even have any of the answers, I don't think, but I'm in there trying, because I want people to be empowered and be able to do things and be able to contribute and be able to stand proud and say, that's my kid, look at him. Let us go.
So the message that you're saying to people who are coming out and working with Aboriginal people is that it's not about them.
No.
It's about what they're doing to help Aboriginal people get empowered.
Yeah, I think so. It's accepting people's right to empowerment. It's not telling people how to do things. Definitely not telling people how to do things. And it's also, sometimes I think it's about taking a step back and looking at perspectives, because people come from different perspectives and see the world with different eyes. And it's actually appreciating someone else's perspective and seeing where someone else comes from and going, you have just as much to be able to contribute, and it's coming from a different direction. So, I don't know. We have interesting conversations in class, and I don't run my classes. I get into lots of trouble because my classes are not structured in the Western way. I actually had a bloke from a university, a big lecturer, come and, one of these observations, we're always getting observed because they want to study Aboriginal people and see how we tick, and yeah, fair enough. So he sat in the class and he said he really, really enjoyed it and everything, and then he was asking different students, what they thought of the class, and then everyone he asked, how do you learn in a class with no structure? And every one of them said, we have structure, it's just different to your structure. So, different ways of doing things and achieving things. It's like with talking circles. And I've actually had a white student, non-Aboriginal student, go back to her work and put in talking circles into the boardroom, because she said it was so much more effective and everyone would contribute and open up more in a board meeting than trying to yell each other down. And it really was a very proactive thing to do. She said, I don't know why we haven't always done it. I said, well, it works for us. We sit back, everybody talks, everyone contributes. Also, when you're going out, I'd say a message to anyone that's gone through a university, going out as an educator or a law person or anything, just realise that you're also a learner and not the teacher, because you will learn as much or more from your students than you will ever teach them. So be open to that. And I learn every day. Some things I didn't want to know, but I learn every day. And it's really good, because I feel like I can grow too and learn, and the more I learn, I think, wow, I didn't know that. This is great, contribute. And that also empowers people, because if you've got students contributing and being able to share their knowledge and be confident enough to share their knowledge and realise how much they do know, that empowers them, and it also value adds to the whole class, or will add to the workplace or wherever. Yeah. Was that communication with law? I have a real issue with law and the way people deal with people going in. I know I went into Rockhampton from Woorabinda one time with a student from another class. We'd actually organised a whole class excursion for 3 days just so we could get this woman into town so she could go to court. It was a bit of a tweak. We were supposed to do it. and she was on the excursion, and then the women went and supported her at the courthouse outside, and it was a pretty serious charge, and she actually got introduced to her solicitor just before they went in. She had had no chance to talk to him or anything. So that's what happens in places. And people go, oh, you just plead guilty, you'll be right. You know, we'll give you this much. In the jails, it was quite an eye-opener. That people would sit there and go, well, my solicitor told me if I pleaded guilty and took a deal, I'd get 6 months. There was one bloke in particular who was he doing 10 years? Yeah, that's what they slapped him with. He had no idea. And it's like the communication is just disgusting. And people just assume, oh yeah, we'll just go to jail. Yeah.
Can you give any other examples where issues have arisen in the legal system like that?
The legal system, parole is a biggie, because again we go back to perspectives and we look at non-Aboriginal eyes inspecting a house of an Aboriginal person as a suitable place for someone to go out on parole or early release, and they don't look at the whole family network set up and the issues around housing and what people manage with. And it's a whole different cultural way of looking at something. And they will look at a house and go, oh, no, that, you've got this many people in this house and people are passing through, and, it's not a suitable place because it hasn't got, so many bedrooms, or it hasn't got this in it, it hasn't got that in it, and it's, pretty ratty looking, and they don't look at the whole picture. They look at it from a non-Aboriginal perspective of, is this a suitable place for someone to go to? So they don't get parole. So a lot of our blokes go, oh no, well, I'm just going to do it full time because I'm not going to get it anyway. So, and then I had one that was without breaching confidentiality. I had, what was it, one section in jail, and they do all the paperwork before someone gets out. He put his address as a cemetery because that's where he'd be living when they picked him up. Right, so he didn't even have a house, but he was full time. He'd done his whole time, and they just had to let him out the gate. They were trying to stop him from being released after he's done his whole sentence because he was going to go and live in this particular cemetery. And I said, well, that's not up to you. This man's getting released, and you can't legally keep him in just because he hasn't got a place of residence to go to. Not your problem. I said, if he wants to go and live at the cemetery, he's probably still got stuff there tucked away somewhere. You might as well just let him go home. So, yeah. And different things, different attitudes. And people often think people are mad in jail. And they had a lot of, there was a lot of antipsychotic medication thrown around. A lot of it was spiritual, cultural, and a lot. One bloke, I'm sure his old people were really getting into him for what he'd done, and he was real sorry for what he'd done. But he had these old people talking to him, and it wasn't psychosis. A psychiatrist or whatever said, met me at the gate as I was on my way in, and she said, I've been out to another prison, coming back, about to go home. Oh, MaryAnne, I need you to see this fella in the morning because he's going off tap. He's talking about stuff. And I said, well, I'm heading in. I'll go and see him now before I go home. I'll leave him overnight. And I sat and talked to him, and it was his old people. I talked to him, and he was fine. Otherwise, they would have carted him off. Yeah, locked him up, sent him over to mental hospital, pumped him full of medication. Yeah, they don't see that. They don't understand that we have that. Yeah. There was also a thing of if someone had died, I would always bear of bad news because they get me to go and tell them. But I'd organise family and stuff to be around in there. Before I was there, the whole process was, someone in the family's died of an Aboriginal person, we better lock them up. and put them into suicide gown and everything so they don't hurt themselves, and put them in isolation, which is totally culturally wrong. It's quite scary, really, because deaths in custody and everything, because people just, that's bad, you can't do that. And for the sake of organising a few people to sit with them and so they can grieve, so people got to grieve. People got to go home for a funeral and all that sort of thing. And yeah, they used to hate me going down to the boss's office because I'd stand up. The one before me wouldn't stand up. She'd go, no, don't even try because you won't get it. You won't get it. This won't happen. But I think that's what we've got to do. We've got to stand up and advocate for our mob because someone's got to. But if they want it, if they ask for it, but not if they don't. Is me rabbiting on?
No, they're really good examples, and I think that it's those real examples that we need of cultural difference that causes miscommunication and conflict that we really need to hear about.
It does.
And we don't hear about it.
And you can't change someone's mind or attitude in a one-day course. I'm sorry, but you can't. It takes a lot longer, and it takes a lot of. You've got to look right at the past to know how people feel now, because so much has happened in the past, and that flows through. And even if for non-Indigenous people, for example, and Australian people, their attitudes and their perspectives have all been built through generations, and the whole culture has been built through generations, and it's the same with Aboriginal side. You cannot change that overnight, but you have to learn about each other, talk to each other. Aboriginal Corporation years ago up at Harvey Bay, and I was working there, and I had a lady ring me up and said, I'm in a church group in Maryborough, and I've just been given the task I have to make friends with an Aboriginal family, and I was wondering, do you know any Aboriginal people like you could put me on to? Walk up the street. She's going to do a lot of good, going knocking on the door of an Aboriginal family, say, hello, I'm your church representative and I've been told I've got to look after you. Oh no. That is wrong. That's what people need, cultural awareness. People need to be able to, no, it really frustrates me. It's like when my son started, when he was in school, and he was my youngest one, and he was in kindergarten, and he got through all the way through kindergarten, and he was still on the same 3 sight words in his little book. I got into trouble for putting more words in, and I was talking to my dad, and he said, you put him down as Aboriginal, didn't you? He won't get an education if he's Aboriginal. And I said, well, yes, he will. I'll make sure of that. Anyway, I moved him to another school, and he was down in a little school in Victoria, and he was the 27th student. That's how big the school was. I enrolled him, and the next day the principal came out, and she was fluttering and carrying on, and she's going, oh, it's so exciting, it's so exciting. She said, this bit here. I said, what? And she said, he's our first one in 130 years. I've looked it up. Like, first what? She said, Aboriginal student. Oh, okay. That's really good. And she said, what do you want me to do? How should I treat him? What should I do? And I said, teach him. Teach him. That's what you can do. And in 6 months they had taught him so much. He learnt so much more than he'd learnt the whole year before in kindergarten. Got him back to the other school because I had to move back to that town. The head teacher bailed me up and said, where's your son been to school? He said, I had to put him through his reading test. He said, and this is halfway through first class. He said, I got him his reading books. He said, I've got primary ones. I've got one of the secondary ones. He said, I've got one off my bookcase, and he read it. He said, he's brilliant. He said, what a kid. said, funny you should say that. I said, he only left 6 months ago, and when he left here, he was illiterate. You tell me what you've been doing with your kids. Yeah, that's the difference in perspective. So if you've got that perspective, it's what I'm leading to. If you get in a classroom and you have Aboriginal kids, do not assume that they are stupid and they will be satisfied with 3 sight words all year. They need to be taught just like anyone else. There's no difference. Those kids need to be taught. They need to be looked after. They need to be inspired. They need to be encouraged. A bit of positive reinforcement, reinforcement's a horrible word, but positive. Don't build them up unnecessarily, but give them credit where credit's due and recognise them as one of your students and not as the black kid over in the corner. So they will excel. That kid that was illiterate, that first school to start off with, went on to get awards right through school, and he ended up school captain, first school captain in the history of his high school. It was Aboriginal, and he got award after award, and he could have still been on the same 3 sight words or just thrown on scrap paper. So I know he's not learning. So that's what we've got to look at. You've got to look at the person standing there in front of you, not the colour or their Aboriginal appearance or their Islander appearance or whatever it is. And it goes for all cultures really, as well as Aboriginal, but we need that recognition and we need to be able to be acknowledged as who we are. And
that's all really good insights. I think that's and that's a really good example for people to understand that their lack of cultural education is what actually damages Aboriginal people, and it's not Aboriginal people who are damaging themselves.
No,
it's other people's lack of education.
That's it.
And their lack of willingness to learn.
Yeah, because people also got to realise we have different priorities. And we have family commitments, we have family priorities, and we have to fulfil those obligations to our family because that's how we've been brought up. And we've been brought up to respect our families. And if you need to do something for your family, that takes precedence over anything else. That doesn't mean we're not good at what we do otherwise, but it means we have those responsibilities, obligations, and we do it. It's like traditionally we had obligations to country, we had obligations to our family, we had a role to play, and that's first and foremost. And all this other stuff is secondary. And the way, I think the education system, the things have to be relevant or you're not going to learn them, because we've survived for how many countless generations because we had that knowledge and we focused on that. And you're not going to learn something that's not relevant to you because it's not worth knowing, because how are you going to use it? It's not practical. At school, if I didn't see the sense in something, I mean, it's not going to help me, why should I learn it? That's like English history at school. I was not well rated English history. It used to bore me totally because that was England. And it was only as I got older and I learned how English history impacted on Aboriginal history, it became relevant. And when you have that relevance, you learn. My son, going back to this little one with the sight words and all the rest of it, and he's big now, if he was doing something in class, if he didn't think it was relevant, he just didn't learn. He had a teacher, one of his teachers said to me, "It's funny," she said, "your son doesn't, he really arcs up if you tell him how to do something. But if you tell him why he needs to learn it, he's fine, he will go and do it for himself. And it's the why. And if you've got that relevance, you can do it." And I think it goes for a lot of us. You don't have to tell us how to do it, we'll work it out. We need to know why we need to learn it. and pretty basic, really. Yeah.
Sometimes I think that other people feel that the system's actually more important than the cultural needs of Aboriginal people. Have you got any examples on that?
Yeah. Yeah. System. And it's like trying to peg us all into little holes, little things. I learned something as a kid. I had a very inquiring mind, and I used to read a lot, and I read a thing about, and I know you're going to laugh at me, I was in primary school, but I read a thing on the Pygmalion theory, and it always stuck in my head of someone telling people in advance, this person's stupid, this one's really smart, that one's the comedian of the class, and all the rest of it, and the teacher that went in treated those kids like that, and that's what they became. And if you tell someone, or you decide for yourself what someone is going to be, that's how you will unconsciously treat them. And they will become that, because that's the expectation. And the expectation I've seen through school is, I could be totally inappropriate here, the blacker you are, the dumber you are. And that is so wrong, but that seems to be a misconception that's been ingrained in this society, and it really annoys me. I read many years ago of a girl in the 1800s or something, an Aboriginal girl that topped her class, over 100 students, and yet they've dumbed down education for Aboriginal kids ever since. My son again, don't go back to him. He arced up at school when we were up in Queensland because they wanted him to have a tutor, and he said, they're only giving me a tutor because I'm Aboriginal. I don't need a tutor, why don't they give them to someone who needs it? And so he refused help all the way through school because he said, no, because they're doing it because I'm black and I don't need a tutor. He said, just because we're black don't mean we're stupid. And yet they'll give people a tutor and someone to read and write for you. I mean, you were smart, you got someone to read and write for you, why should you have to do it? You know, you can get away with it, you will. Yeah, people can stand on their own 2 feet, and people can stand on their own 2 feet, so...
If they're taught properly.
Yeah, if they're allowed to in the first place. If they're empowered to, not allowed. Yeah. So...
All right. Are there any other stories that you want to share? Any that you can think off the top of your head?
Stories.
Because
I'm going to turn that off with a phone call. Sorry. And I've moved.
No, you're right. So I might get you to give a couple of examples of racism that you've seen in action through some real life experiences.
Yeah, well, I've got heaps. It's really interesting because people tell me I don't look Aboriginal. Coming from a small town, central New South Wales, years ago on the train, and one of my friends was working for the education department, and we were both heading down on the same train, and I didn't have a sleeper, but she said, now get to Cootamundra, you can slip the guard $10 and he'll put you in a sleeper. And it's all very underhand, but that's how it worked apparently. So anyway, we've got to Cootamundra and she's come in at the same time as me, and I've asked the guard about, you know, is there any sleepers available? And he said, oh, I'm really sorry, we haven't got any. He said, just excuse me a minute. Anyway, he showed my friend, pointed her up to the other end. He said, your cabin's up there, whatever number it was. He's turned back to me and he said, well, actually we do have one, but it's with her. And yeah, because she was obviously a lot darker than me. And I went, oh, no, well, she's my mate. I said, that's great, I'll go in there. And you know, this man was really very dark himself from overseas. What can I say? From India. Good. And how interesting that he was so racist. the embarrassing bit was actually going into the cab to see my mate, and she said, "Oh, I thought there wasn't any available." And then I felt really awful that I had to explain to my good friend that that man had been so racist and didn't want to put me in with her because she was black and I wasn't. Thank goodness we got a sense of humour. We laughed all the way down to Sydney. We didn't get much sleep. Kept thinking about it and laughing. But it was awful. That was a horrible moment to have to do that and then go in and go, "Well, actually, yeah, but he said this," and yeah. And then years later, up in the Territory, walked into a shoe shop about visiting a sister, and I had to get some thongs from a little bloke, and waiting to be served. And there was an Aboriginal lady at the counter buying, I think she got 3 pairs of joggers. It was like $300 in cash. She handed over to the shopkeeper. And she was just picking up the bag. She sort of half turned away from the counter. The shopkeeper has bent down and got one of those room deodorisers, started spraying it around in the air, turns to us and goes, my sister and I, and went, "They do smell, don't they?" And I was like, oh my God. I couldn't even say anything. I was speechless. And I just looked at this woman. My sister grabbed me by the arm because she knew I was about to react. And I just looked around and I said, "We don't want to buy anything in the shop." And I just walked out. And I lived in Catherine for 3 years and I never put foot in that shop again. So I thought, no, how dare you? That's just horrible.
What about I know you've worked in like jails, education and health.
Yeah,
Have you seen any examples?
I represent the community on a particular group to do with the hospital. But my role really is to advocate on behalf of the community for any things that happen there at the hospital that are inappropriate.
So can you give me an example?
I can give
or
you
a couple of
examples, but I'll give you one example that happened a couple of days ago. And I went up to visit one of my past students. She rang me up. She'd been in, had a procedure, and she was in hospital for a few days. So I've gone up, taken a bit of fruit. Anyway, I got up there a bit after lunch and then took some washing home for her. Came back up about 6 o'clock at night and she said, "Oh, I'm so thirsty." And I looked over and I said, "Oh, where's your water jug?" And she said, "They haven't given me one yet." And she'd been in since 10:30 in the morning with no water jug. And she had a temperature and an infection. So she really needed water. So I said, "Well, I'm going to get you one." I asked the nurse. She said, oh, they might come in soon. And I went, no, I'll go and ask the nurse. So I've gone out to ask, and the nurse said, "Oh, I'm a bit busy at the moment." She said, "But go up to the other desk. Someone up there might serve you." And I've gone up there, and there was no one there. So I walked all the way back down again. And I said, "Oh, look, excuse me, there's no one up there. I need a water jug for this lady because she's very thirsty." "Oh, well, if I've got time later, I'll bring one in." Anyway, I've heard a noise, so I've gone back up the other desk and I said, "I need a water jug for this particular lady." So finally got it. And then I said, "Well, I'm going to have to mention this because, this is not good enough. We need this sorted because people can die of thirst, dehydrate. Not good when you've got an infection." So I've left the hospital after visiting ours, after she's got a water jug and had about 3 glasses of water because she was dying of thirst. And talked to her the next morning. She said, she said, "That nurse come back in and got up me after you left for getting someone else to ask for water." She said, you could have dealt with it." So that went in my report too. So they're investigating it. But that's one person can say something. How many of our mob go up to that hospital and do without water? I had Another mate told me she had a friend in hospital and all she did was ask the nurse if she could get her slippers, move her slippers across so she could actually get her slippers on to go to the toilet, and the nurse said, get them yourself. Yeah. We have 2 cultural liaison officers up at that hospital. There's a man and a woman, and they're supposed to do one part of the hospital each. That's a big coverage for 2 cultural liaisons. And they get very little support. They're not there where people can see them. I heard someone explaining what they did, and, the lady one does this, and the boy does this bit. The boy does something else. The boy does something else. I've had to go, excuse me, how old's the male cultural liaison officer? And she said, oh, he's about mid-20s or something. So, oh, really? I said, well, he's a man, he's not a boy. And culturally, you call an Aboriginal man boy. You're lucky to get out of it safely. I said, because that is so offensive. And that's long gone. That doesn't happen anymore. You can't do that. That is discriminating. That's offensive. That's a real put down. I said, you call him by his name, or you call him a man. You don't call him the boy. So,
any other examples of with incidents have occurred? Because this would be really useful for people working in health.
Oh, okay. I will tell you. This is, a lady that I knew, a student, had come from somewhere else and needed to go to the hospital for something. I went over with her because she was not from here and she didn't know. Anyway, an Aboriginal lady. If you want to get sort of stereotyping Aboriginal appearance, because she was quite dark and whatever, take her over to they triage you in the hospital. You go through first, the nurse makes a decision whether you're going to see a doctor or sit outside for 5 hours. And then they're saying to her, oh, well, how much have you had to drink? And she's saying, I don't drink. I said, oh, alcohol's really bad for you. You shouldn't drink so much, you're going to, And she, I don't drink. I haven't drunk in years. I don't drink. I'm teetotaler. I don't drink. But I'm in pain. Anyway, I couldn't get through it on. She was a non-drinker. But anyway, and that's stereotyping, and that's assuming someone goes into a hospital, they're suffering from something, from alcohol. That's a really bad assumption. I gave them at 4 different places, including individual people plus desks and doctor, everybody, my mobile number to contact me when they had finished testing her, so I could come back and take her back to TAFE. About 40 minutes later, that lady walked into my classroom. They had let her out the front door in a strange town. Obviously still not well. I think they'd given her a needle of some kind. I don't know what it was. But anyway, she's come into the classroom. I've got students to take her back to the motel to settle her down. What really got me was we lost her about 2 months later. She passed away. And that's just wrong. It's people making assumptions. You're dealing with people's lives. If you're in the medical area, you're dealing with people's lives. You can't assume. Also, I'll tell you, people maybe have more than one thing wrong with them. People don't always tell you everything. If you go in for something, you may have an underlying condition. Look for that condition. Don't just treat that. That woman had something seriously wrong with her, which was presenting as something else. You got to dig, you got to look, and you got to make sure. Don't just ask questions that people don't understand or assume they've been drinking too much. So, yeah. I know, it gets me. I can't. We might have 5 minutes. Can you turn that off?
Yeah,
I can't.
We'll stop.
Yeah.
We might actually stop now.
Yeah, that's
Thank you so much.